Everything felt normal. The conversations were flowing, the connection felt stable, nothing seemed broken. And then they changed. Replies became shorter, energy became distant, warmth turned neutral, no argument, no warning, no explanation, just emotional withdrawal. One day they were there, fully present. The next day, it felt like you were talking to a stranger. If you've ever experienced this, you know how destabilizing it is, because sudden detachment doesn't just end connection. It rewrites reality. You start questioning what was real, you replay every moment, you wonder what you missed. Today, we're breaking down the psychology of people who detach without warning, why it happens, what it really means, and why it often says more about them than it does about you. Stay until the end, because once you understand this pattern, you'll stop blaming yourself for someone else's silence. The first psychological reason people detach without warning is emotional avoidance. Some individuals are deeply uncomfortable with confrontation, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. When tension rises, when expectations increase, when intimacy deepens, their nervous system interprets it as threat. Instead of addressing discomfort directly, they retreat. Detachment becomes a coping mechanism. Rather than saying, "I'm overwhelmed," they disappear emotionally. Rather than admitting uncertainty, they reduce communication. To them, withdrawal feels safer than vulnerability. It's not calculated cruelty, it's unregulated avoidance. But to the person on the receiving end, it feels like abandonment. Another reason is fear of accountability. Detaching silently allows someone to exit without explanation. Explanation requires honesty. Honesty requires discomfort. And discomfort requires responsibility. When someone no longer wants to invest in a connection, but doesn't want to face the emotional consequences, detachment becomes the escape route. It avoids difficult conversations. It avoids admitting changed feelings. It avoids seeing the hurt in your response. By fading out instead of speaking up, they protect themselves from guilt. Silence becomes insulation. There's also the psychology of emotional investment imbalance. Sometimes people detach when they sense that the connection is becoming more serious than they anticipated. When emotional depth increases, expectations follow, and expectations can feel heavy to someone who isn't prepared for them. Instead of communicating their hesitation, they pull back. Gradually at first, then completely. This shift often feels sudden to you, but internally they may have been debating for weeks. The problem is not that feelings changed. It's that communication didn't happen. Detachment without warning is often avoidance disguised as indifference. Some individuals detach because they operate from an attachment style rooted in inconsistency. People with avoidant tendencies crave connection, but fear dependence. When intimacy reaches a certain threshold, they experience internal conflict. They want closeness, but closeness triggers vulnerability. So they subconsciously create distance to regain emotional control. This isn't always conscious manipulation, it's psychological conditioning. They learned early in life that independence equals safety. So when emotions intensify, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to detach. There's also the element of control. Detaching without warning places the other person in a reactive position. You're left confused, you're left seeking answers, you're left trying to repair something you don't fully understand. Meanwhile, the detached person maintains emotional distance. Control often feels powerful. By withdrawing, they decide the access. They decide when, or if communication resumes. It creates asymmetry. And asymmetry can feel stabilizing for someone who fears vulnerability. Another psychological layer is emotional compartmentalization. Some people can disconnect from feelings rapidly. They don't process emotions gradually, they shut them down. When something feels inconvenient, overwhelming, or uncertain, they mentally file it away. This ability can look cold, but often it's self-protection developed over time. They may convince themselves the connection wasn't that serious. They minimize the bond to justify the withdrawal. This makes detachment easier for them and more confusing for you. Because while you're processing loss, they've already numbed it. But here's the hardest truth. Sometimes detachment without warning isn't about fear. It's about shifting interest. People don't always announce when their feelings fade. Sometimes they disengage quietly because confrontation feels unnecessary to them. They may believe that distance communicates enough, or they may prioritize comfort over clarity. Not every detachment is deep psychology. Sometimes it's emotional convenience, and that reality hurts the most because it forces you to accept that closure isn't always offered. So what does this mean for you? It means sudden detachment is rarely random. It often stems from avoidance, fear of accountability, attachment conditioning, desire for control, or emotional compartmentalization. But here's what it does not automatically mean. It does not mean you were unworthy. It does not mean you imagined the connection. It does not mean you failed. When someone detaches without warning, it reveals their communication style, their emotional capacity, and their coping mechanisms, not your value. Yes, it hurts, because ambiguity destabilizes the mind, because unanswered questions linger, because human beings crave narrative endings. But sometimes the absence of explanation is the explanation. Someone who cannot communicate discomfort will eventually communicate distance. And someone who chooses silence over honesty is showing you their limits. Your power lies in recognizing that, not chasing clarity from someone unwilling to provide it, not rewriting yourself to prevent abandonment, but understanding that emotional maturity includes transparency. And if someone detaches without warning, they've already revealed the depth they're capable of. Sometimes the most painful endings are the clearest lessons. If this made you reflect, let it sit, because awareness doesn't erase hurt, but it prevents self-blame. And that's where healing begins.